So we got this final letter in addition to, the exhibit and everything. There was a final letter from the Torchbearer that read, "As long as we don't give up, Clancy isn't dead." And again, this is kind of interesting because Clancy is dead was the anagram for Skilled and Icy, unless I'm going crazy, right? So Skilled and Icy, Clancy is dead. And then we got all the, what was it? There was a code that said not dead after Ned's Fireplace came out. And I can't remember if it was from Ned's Fireplace or from the letters that were issued from DEMA after that, before the album was released or announced. So we had this phrase, Clancy is dead, and then isn't dead. So there's two directions we could go with this. One, the Torchbearer is saying Clancy is dead right now, or he will be as soon as we give up, kind of thing, right? Clancy becoming Nico is Clancy dying. And there's a sense in which Clancy is dead and Skilled and Icy also ties into that. Or there's a sense in which this letter was supposed to come out, or was written and is now being revealed, but was written during the Skilled and Icy era. And the reason I say that is because we've seen other letters from other FP exhibits, especially, or only for the Clancy Tour, where the letters didn't seem to be written at the time in which we saw them, or certainly they didn't seem to fit into the story as we knew it at that point. And so there's a sense in which I've always seen these letters, these FPE letters, to in many ways exist outside of the timeline of the story that we're seeing, which again, I've talked about this a ton. At some point I will have talked it to death, but perhaps today is not that day. There are at least two different perspectives or two different timelines going on, right? We have the letters and the story that we see there, at least one story in there, and at least one different story in the visual side of things, the music videos. They don't line up one-to-one. There's two different kind of narratives going on here. There's potentially a third going on with the letters. These letters, the FPE letters, not the journal letters. I think most likely this letter probably is supposed to exist kind of as something that the Torchbearer writes to the Banditos after they see Clancy give in and become Nico. And they say, as long as we don't give up as well, Clancy isn't dead. We can go and find the new Clancy, the new iteration of Clancy as he begins his cycle. So let's go do that, right? Let's not lose hope. Anacraft, I think this is probably more on the side of Clancy as a title, like the figure of Clancy is only dead when we stop looking for a hero. Definitely a possibility. I just think from the visual perspective, I think that's a very valid theory, is what I'll say. I still don't buy into that theory, but I do think it's completely respectable to do so. Right? There's a lot of evidence to support that because we don't know definitively, right? I prefer to buy into the theory that it's all the same person. He's just going through a time loop. And it ties into the idea that it's also kind of a dream, right? This is all happening in a dream world. So things like, not being stuck in a time loop, like us normal people are not stuck in a time loop. In the waking world, things like that can happen in the dream world, if that makes sense. I always like to see it as that, as he's going through these cycles. And the explanation for that is, it's happening in a dream. It's not like the laws of time and space don't really apply in DEMA in the exact same way that they do here. But that's why we see things like two Clancys, both represented by Tyler, that version of Clancy, if you will, two different Clancys at play in Paladin Strait. We see the one in the tower facing Nico, and we see one on the cliffs. And we know the one on the tower isn't the one on the cliffs, because the one in the tower, we then see hit the end of his story in City Walls, he becomes Nico, and the one on the cliffs is not Nico, right? So we know those have to be two different Clancys in whatever way. We also see two different Clancys earlier in Paladin Strait. We see one in the camp who's not smeared. We see another one leading the armies who is smeared. So that's my interpretation. And that's my reasoning for thinking that Clancy isn't a symbol, purely. He is an actual person. That's not a definitive theory, so it's entirely possible it is a title, and I do think there's a lot of evidence for that as well. It could go both ways, and probably the actual answer is some combination of both, and that's why we don't know, right? It's got to be some way to reconcile both these theories, and that's how we actually arrive at the truth of the matter. But again, that might be something that only Tyler Joseph really knows, or Josh, the writers of the story only really know that answer. The way I see it, Ventry says, Clancy is the part of Tyler who rebels against the dark part in him. When he loses, he stops existing for a bit, as he's Nico now, but soon after, that part of him exists again. Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a good way to look at it in a sort of sense of how it applies to the real world, right? I don't know if that's exactly how it works in DEMA, because obviously we do see like a physical transformation in the DEMA world from Clancy into Nico. But certainly, considering all of this to be a metaphor for Tyler's struggles, then yeah, I think you're spot on. Do you think Twin Pods will continue the lore beyond Breach, even if there's not another album about it? So do I think so? No. Could they, until another album came out? Yeah. They could continue telling the story until their next album releases, or until they start working on their next album. I just think most likely they're not really going to do a ton more with it. I could see maybe something kind of at the end of their festival stint in 2026. That would kind of be my best guess. But in a lot of ways, I think, certainly visually, I don't think we're going to get anything more. We might get another letter, right? I think that would be the extent of it. Or another website update for the DEMA org website, or another, thing like that. They said the nice thing now is they can make music without a deadline. Exactly, yeah. So I really do think story's over, wrapped it up, might get residual pieces like this. But yeah,